Hi everybody, my name is Drake Pleasure and this is Flintlock Operator. Not only are we going to cover a really interesting topic, but it's the first video that I actually have a guest on. This is Thomas.
Howdy.
And what we're going to be doing is comparing the modern kit to the 18th century kit. We're going to cover the topics of the clothing, the gear that we carry, and the armament. So stick around. This is going to be interesting.
I'm only here for the violence. It's going to be excellent.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Let's get into it. The first item that we're going to talk about is our clothing. And obviously, just like every aspect of our kits, they're very drastically different from each other. They're separated by about 250 years. So as we go throughout this whole comparison, we're going to see how different all these pieces of kit are, but also the similar function they perform within their own context. Now the first thing we're going to talk about is our clothing, and our clothing is obviously going to be really very drastically different, just like every single portion of our weapons and kit here. But all of our clothing serves a specific purpose within the context of our own kit and our own area of combat. So the type of pants that I'm wearing are leather leggings, and there were a lot of different types of pants that were worn back during the 18th century. I happen to like wearing these leather pants out here because there's a lot of brush, there's a lot of blackberry vines, there's a lot of thorns, and these are going to protect me against just about everything out here. You could also be wearing breeches, long linen trousers, just full pants, wool leggings made out of one thick layer or two layers of wool. I like wearing these leather leggings out here in the brush and in the woods, and these are going to protect me from all of that, and they're also going to protect me in case I need to go down on one knee, crawl through the undergrowth. So these are going to really protect me well. How about you, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm wearing Cry combat pants. The basic idea is the same, to protect you from the elements and give you a place to hold some of your stuff. Funny how you mentioned going down on one knee or sliding. These have integrated knee pads so that when you're crawling, kneeling, or even traveling through the brush, it's giving you a little bit more protection, as well as generous amounts of pockets for carrying different amounts of gear, kit, extra clothing, socks, any sort of sustainment stuff that you might need. But the basic idea between both is the same. And I'd say the biggest advantage that they probably have over your options is the amount of pockets and the extra stuff that you can carry on them. I've got about 10 different pockets on these things. Anything from zippered pockets, velcroed pockets, elastic liners, anything like that. They're just capable of carrying a lot of cargo as compared to like leggings or wool trousers. But the basic overall functional idea is the same.
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage you certainly have over me, because if I want to carry stuff, I've got to carry it around in a pouch or a wallet. As I hardly don't have any pockets on me. I've just got pockets on my coat. But you've got, how many pockets do you have on there? Like,
oh, dude,
15?
Yeah, like, let's see, 2, 4, 6, about 10.
Yeah. So I have none. So that's definitely a step up for you.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of pockets, let's go ahead and talk about our outerwear. You might be wondering why I'm wearing such a big, heavy coat when it's not even that cold outside.
The thought crossed my mind.
Yes, and some people might even think, my goodness, he's insane. The most common question that reenactors get is, aren't you hot in that coat? Well, the answer is, yes, we are, but it's not as bad as you think.
In contrast to that, most of the outerwear today, I mean, it's a beautiful day outside, so I'm just wearing an athletic tee. Polyesters, nylons, all that sort of stuff is going to help modern outerwear today be antimicrobial, sweat wicking, weather resistant. But especially when it comes to in terms of jacket technology, back then they had to use the materials that they had on hand to work with, whereas nowadays we can get things imported from anywhere. So your hard outer layers for keeping off rain, snow, heavy wind, stuff like that, hard shell jackets, and then inner sort of base layers for thermal insulation, different stuff like that. We're just going to have a much wider range of options that we can suit to a lot more different types of environments and places.
Now, I might not want to wear such a heavy coat at all times of the year. I could be wearing either a lighter weight linen coat or a wool coat. I'm going to be choosing these natural fibers mostly because that's what I would have had available to me back during the 18th century, we didn't have the modern man-made type fibers to be able to make clothing out of, so we've got to rely on these natural materials. So one of the benefits of wearing wool is that it's going to be very breathable, even in warm weather. And if it gets wet, it's going to be able to keep me warm even when it's wet. Back during the 18th century, clothing was so much more expensive than clothing is in the 21st century. So we have to be able to own far less clothing, but they have to fill a lot more roles. So you actually mentioned the moisture wicking elements of modern clothing. My clothing right now is actually doing the exact same thing. Since all the clothing I'm wearing is breathable, air can pass through it as it wants to. So I'm wearing a linen shirt as a base, and once I start sweating into that shirt, it gets wet. And once that air passes through my coat and through my shirt, once I start to get some airflow through there, I actually start to cool off. So that wind is actually coming from behind, and I've got a little bit of sweat on my back, but every time that wind kicks up, I can actually feel the cooling hand of the wind on my back.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's in high contrast to today, where especially with colder environments, instead of just getting one heavy outer base layer, you want to be able to layer up and layer down as the temperature fluctuates, so that you can specifically avoid sweating, because with more modern materials, sweat is going to get you wet and it's going to be hard to dry, especially under a base layer. So as soon as you get wet, it's going to get super cold if you're in cold environments, and that's a pretty interesting contrast between today's materials and stuff like that.
Yeah, so we're actually relying on ourselves sweating to help keep us cool.
That's interesting.
Now, to address that topic of the cold weather kit versus the hot weather, well, I mentioned that we're going to want to wear wool whenever it's cold out, and if it was really winter, I would actually be wanting to wear a wool base shirt instead of a linen one, because then that evaporative cooling would be a negative effect on me. So I would, in the really cold, I would want to swap out my linen shirt for a wool base layer. So Thomas, I've got a question for you. Do you know which part of the body leaches out the most heat?
It's got to be the head.
Yeah, definitely the head. So you're obviously not wearing something on your head. Why don't you go ahead and tell us why you're not wearing a hat?
Because it's beautiful out today. I wanted to feel the breeze, and I don't want to wear a brain bucket and have all that weight on my neck for all these hours that we're filming.
Yeah. Now my brain bucket doesn't have a whole lot of strain on my head. So this is my wool felt hat, and you might be wondering why I have it off to the side like this. And the primary reason is to look cool. Always look cool. It's the most important thing.
True.
Actually, it's so whenever I go to shoulder my musket. My hat's not in the way.
It all makes sense now.
Yep, it all makes sense now, and it looks rather dashing and cavalier, if I may say so myself.
Indeed.
Yeah. So obviously, since this is a wool hat, it's going to help keep my head warm. And like I mentioned earlier, just like with my wool outer garments, I'm going to be out in the elements a lot more. So I'm going to want something that's going to be able to keep my head warm whenever I step out and it's a cold morning. But again, since it's wool, it's going to be able to help keep my head cool as well. And obviously with the brim, that's going to help to direct sunlight and any potential rain away from my head. And it's going to help me see a lot clearly in a bright glare.
Yeah, so hat options nowadays, there's all sorts of different ones. A lot of people wear boonie hats, caps, for a lot of the same reasons, to keep your sun out of your eyes and your head out of the elements. And also, of course, there's helmets. Helmet setups vary anything from like small lightweight bump helmets just to keep debris and stuff off your head, to full-on ballistic helmets with night vision setups and batteries and IR strobes and extra lights, and however much weight you want to cram on there depending on what your mission needs and what capabilities you want to add to your helmet setup. Like I said, it's a beautiful day out today. We're going to be out here in the field filming for a long time, not doing any sort of strike mission or anything like that. So I'd prefer to wear helmets as little as possible to save the strain on my neck.
So I've got another question for you, Thomas. How, in a modern military context, do you determine a soldier's role within his unit?
Usually by what rank patches he's got and what equipment he's carrying.
Yeah. So hats were actually used in a very similar way to the patches and to the equipment. So different types of soldiers would wear different types of hats. Grenadiers would wear those really tall bearskin hats. If they were like light infantry, they'd be wearing a different type of hat. And you could also tell because they had different tassels and cockades here on their hats. And that would be able to help differentiate who they were and what their role was within that particular unit and within the Army as a whole. Now that's our base layer and our clothing. So let's go ahead and move and start talking about the gear and how we're carrying it. Go ahead and tell me a little bit about the basics of what you're carrying here, Thomas.
Yeah, so I've just got like an assaulter set up, a plate carrier, Spiritus LV-119, Hesco level 4 plates, Spiritus micro rig on the front, so 3 mags. You can fit extra mags in the elastic cummerbunds. It's got spaces up front that you can configure for different admin pouches or tools, anything like that. You can put expander wings on for radios, sustainment, water. I've just got a little dangler under it that I keep med supplies in, stuff like that. So the modern kit's kind of all about modularity, adaptability, you know, being able to take one kit and set it up for different types of missions. You know, if I was out here doing like overlanding in the woods all day, stuff like that, hiking around from place to place, you're not going to want a heavy setup like this. You're going to want something more pared down, like a chest rig, or even, you know, larger chest rigs like sustainment rigs and things like that, where you're carrying food, water, all that sort of stuff on it. I do have a hydration back panel on mine, just because I like to stay hydrated when I'm out running around all day, especially when I'm wearing this, you know, heavy plates and sweating around and all that sort of stuff.
This is to me, such a fascinating aspect of how our gear is so different, and yet in a way it's still similar. And I really think you can start to see the evolution of how we got from here to here. The way that my kit is set up is similar to how yours is set up, and that is how ammunition and the gears and tools that you're going to need to run your gun and your weapons, how those are carried. Now, what I have is, I have my belly box here that has 12 cartridges, and I also have my shooting pouch and my powder horn. And what this setup allows me to do is, if I need to shoot more quickly, I can dip into my cartridge pouch here and reload far more quickly than I can with my shooting pouch and my powder horn.
It's the exact same thing with this setup. I've got mags on my belt, and if I'm having to reload right now, you know, and I don't have time to set anything up, I'm just going right off the belt because that's the fastest. But if I have time, I can swap mags out of the plate carrier and onto the belt to kind of keep replenishing the belt and keep replenishing that emergency supply. That being said, you know, reloads off the plate carrier are, you know, readily available as well.
And you've got several pouches. I actually have a pouch underneath here, and this just has, it's got a little knot, it's got a knife in it, I think a small fire kit, and also in my shooting pouch, I've got a tool that I can take my musket apart with. I've got extra flints. I've got a couple other things in there that'll help me keep my musket up and running during a fight, as well as help cleaning it and maintain it.
Yeah, it's the same thing here. I've got a ferro rod for starting fires, lighters, wipes for my lenses on my optics, things to kind of service the rifle, keep it running, you know, small little tool kits, stuff like that. I've got a multi-tool, so here you've got screwdrivers, pliers, anything like that, just for, you know, basic little tasks that you might need to keep you going throughout a mission.
You've got a couple bags on here, and you've actually, your pack back there has room for more. And if you wanted to, you could throw on a pack.
Yeah.
I'm not carrying my haversack around right now, and I don't have a knapsack on, but that would also be an option for me if I wanted to carry around a little bit more gear. So that could be my replacement for your little dangler pouch there is my haversack. I can carry food, extra gear, and then if I'm on campaign, and I know we're not talking about this necessarily in this context, I'm going to have my backpack on, and that's going to have basically everything I need to go on campaign.
Right, that's a big difference with today's kit, is now with vehicles, either land vehicles, helicopters, planes, anything like that, you're never too far away from a resupply. And that can be anything from you're hiking a few days to the next resupply point, to you're on a SWAT op and the truck is right outside the front door of the house that you're at. So we're not having to carry as much sustainment type things as you do, unless we're doing long overlanding missions. But there I'd have my big backpack, chest harness. You know, I'd pare down like no plates. I'd pare down as much weight as I could, just so I could fit as much sustainment stuff as I can and still be somewhat comfortable to carry over, you know, mountainous terrain.
And you've got hydration on your back, and I have hydration too. I've got my tin canteen back there, and this holds, I believe it's about a liter. I think it's about a liter.
Yeah, I've got 3 liters and a Camelback in this zip-on back panel.
Yeah, like you mentioned, man, staying hydrated on the battlefield and in a fight is so important. Just in like the mock battles that we do, you get so dehydrated, and I can imagine how thirsty you would get in an actual battle or an actual fight. At the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse, more soldiers actually died of dehydration than did gunshot wounds. And I'm sure throughout history that's probably a similar theme. So it's so important to be able to have a method to carry around water with us. Now I notice you don't have a whole lot of blades on you. I really only see one.
Yep, this is it.
Yeah, you've got your little SCI Zula right there. I have a couple more blades on me. I've got my long knife, essentially a utility tool. It could also be a fighting knife. So it fills the role of almost universal tool because you can use knives for so many countless tasks, just like that one. But also as a backup sidearm.
Yeah, see, I don't like carrying around big fixed blades on a lot of my kit because I just don't like the weight penalty. I prefer just little small ones because unlike you, I don't really use this in any sort of combat roles. This is just for processing little sticks to start a fire, cutting pieces of wire, you know, anything like that. Just little basic things. It's more of a tool than a huge implemented part of my kit like a lot of these blades are for you.
Yeah, and both of these blades here really cover both of those aspects. So I've got my tomahawk here, and this is going to be a good woods tool as well as a weapon. So obviously, if we're out here in this context, you've talked a lot about how in a more modern military context, you have so much more infrastructure. You have vehicles, conveyance, and the availability of all sorts of a very wide array of tools at your disposal. I have far less tools at my disposal, so I'm going to have to rely on making a lot of what I need. And I'm going to need to carry around more tools to be able to affect my effectiveness as a soldier or militiaman or frontiersman. Now let's get to the exciting part of our kit. Like none of the other stuff has been exciting. Let's start talking about the weapons. Tell us about your sidearm.
So I carry striker-fired handguns mostly. I'm not part of the hammer-fired gang quite yet. Mine is a CZ P10C. I've done a little bit to it as far as like comps, red dots, all that sort of stuff, but the core premise is the same. Most striker-fired handguns on the market today, they're the most common and they all have very similar operating principles. So it's just a semi-automatic 9mm handgun. It's got a 15+1 capacity with the standard mags. Of course, you can bump that up to 20 or whatever you can think about as far as aftermarket extensions go, but sidearms are an important part of all modern kit today.
So really the only name in the game for modern sidearms are pistols. I mean, there are some people that try and get away with carrying big knives around, but really there might be a couple contexts where you could get away with that.
It's just too impractical.
It's too impractical. And pistols have really proved themselves to be very effective sidearms over the past, really, I guess, 150, almost 200 years now. The primary sidearm that I'm going to be running and that most soldiers and militiamen are going to be running if they have a musket is a bayonet. And this bayonet is going to slide onto the barrel and lock in place using the lug that also doubles as the front sight. And I can still actually fire this musket with the bayonet in place. And this bayonet essentially turns my musket into a 6-foot-long spear. So imagine, if you will, you're a soldier on the battlefield. You've just fired a volley, and there's a massive amount of smoke in front of you. And you hear the yelling of the opposite army and fixed bayonets, charge bayonets. And here they come, several hundred crazed men coming through the fog of war, running at you with fixed steel. Would you want to stand or would you want to run?
I'm running the other way, man.
Yeah, I think I would. I wouldn't really want to get into a bayonet fight, especially with the triangular shaped blade that, you know, makes a wound that you can't close up or sew. In the 18th century, the bayonet was not the only sidearm available. Pistols were available, so let's get rid of this. Ah! And I think you have. Yes, there you go. Let me trade you there. Pistols were available for use to soldiers back during the 18th century, but they would not be nearly as common as a musket. And obviously we're going to have a similar problem. Is I've got one shot I can take with the pistol, and then I'm out, and then I've got to reload it. This particular pistol is a heavy dragoon pistol, and the way that these would have been employed is there would have been 2 or more of these pistols in buckets surrounding the saddle of the cavalryman. And as the cavalryman rides closer to the enemy, he just starts discharging these as he gets closer. So these will not be really far ranged weapons at all. I mean, you're not going to be standing at even 20 or 30 yards trying to shoot an enemy with this, because it's just, you're just not going to hit anything. Now these do have a decent amount of power because, I mean, this is basically a 20 gauge short shotgun. So this is going to have a good bit of power behind it, but you're not going to be firing these from hardly any range, and obviously this has no sights in it. In a militia context, in some ranger and light infantry units, in addition or in absence of a bayonet, they would have and utilize the tomahawk. And the tomahawk is both a tool and a weapon. So this is a relatively small tomahawk head, and as I understand it, the tomahawks were smaller than more of our modern tomahawks, and it makes it very light and fast as a weapon. And these would have been forged out of wrought iron, but they would have had a small steel cutting head. And what that combination allowed was you could impart a lot of stress onto the body and the eye of the tomahawk, and that wrought iron, since it's so soft, would be able to absorb those impacts very well, but it would still retain that sharp cutting edge. So you had the benefit of both the soft and the hard steel present in the tomahawk. Now there's one more category of sidearm that would have been available back during the 18th century, and that is the sword. Swords. Yeah, the sword. So the swords that would have been available back during the 18th century, like your pistol, there would be a lot of variety. And this is this type of sword would be called either a hunting sword or a hanger. Also a little bit too early of a sword to be present during the Revolutionary War period. This is more late 17th, early 18th century. But it is representative of the type, and that type is a shorter blade with some sort of a handguard. And I have seen some examples that did have this type of shell guard right there. And what that's for is to help catch your opponent's weapons as they're striking down. You know, obviously it's got the basic sword design, single-edged, thick spine, handle, hand protection, and pommel. And this one also has a fuller, which helps to lighten the weight of the sword. We could use a sword like this as a machete as well as a weapon. I've actually used this as a machete before, and it works pretty well. And that goes back to the point that so much of what I'm having to carry on me needs to be multi-purpose. So just like many other pieces of my kit, I need the sword to be as multifunctional as possible. So Thomas, what kind of ammunition are you carrying with you right now?
So I've got 55 grain Federal XM193. It's a good training round. It's relatively inexpensive, at least for today's ammo prices. It's a 55 grain projectile, 5.56. Its effectiveness really depends on your barrel length. I'm running a shorter barrel on my rifle, so I'm really not going to use this anywhere out past like 300 yards probably at the most. But with longer range barrels and longer rifles, you can stretch the combat effectiveness out 400, 500, 600 yards, so on and so forth. And just depending on what environment you're going to be working in, how much weight you want to carry, stuff like that. As far as sidearm ammunition, I've just got standard 115 grain ball ammo. I don't carry this when I'm like carrying the sidearm for personal defense. If that were the case, I'd want to carry hollow points. I think I normally carry Spear or Federal HSTs, Spear Gold Dots, and those are usually 147 grain hollow points. XM193 is not a bad choice, especially for most AR-15s, but if you wanted a little bit more accuracy and capability and weren't too concerned with spending a little bit more on your ammunition, you might want some heavier grains. Most AR barrels have higher twist rates. Mine's a 1-to-7, so it likes heavier projectiles, like 77 grain, open tip ammunition, Black Hills, MK262, stuff like that.
So the type of ammunition that I'm going to be carrying around with me are these paper cartridges, and this is comprised of my 69 caliber ball and about between 100 and 110 grain powder charge. The historical powder charges would have been a little bit more than that, but with our modern powders, they're a little bit more efficient. So the process of loading is I'm going to tear off the tab here, I'm going to pour a priming charge, dump the primary powder charge down the barrel, insert the bullet and the paper cartridge into the muzzle, ram it down, and then I'm ready to fire. In addition to my cartridge pouch here, I've got my shooting bag and my powder horn. And this powder horn, it'll hold a little less than half a pound of powder. And in my shooting pouch, I use wool patches. These hold really well. The round ball.
Oh yeah, that's got some weight to it.
Well, I don't know how many grains that is, but
that's some mass moving right there.
And that's less than an ounce, because it's not a 12 gauge slug, but it is quite a bit. Now, two tools that I have to run my musket are these. Well, I have a powder measure. This one's just made out of a hollowed out deer antler, and it holds about 100 grains of powder.
Is that to make sure you're putting the right amount of powder in each
Yes,
time,
yes,
so you're not exploding your gun?
Yes, because one of the really dangerous things is overcharging our gun. So we want to make sure that we're putting the proper amount of powder into our gun every single shot. The second tool that I have is a vent pick, and this is to clean out the touch hole that goes from the priming pan into the breech of the rifle. That way the priming charge has a clear path to the primary powder charge in the barrel. Now we're going to really get into where the differences really are so apparent in the technological leaps, because you can essentially make a lot of this same kit out of these materials. And we see so much of the same mentality reflected in our similar pieces of kit. But in regards to the weaponry, it's so drastically different, because the combat effectiveness of your weapon and my weapon are so different. So go ahead and tell us about what you've got.
Yeah, so this is my rifle. It's an 11.5-inch barrel. I do have a suppressor on there. As you can see, it's adorned with quite a bit of equipment. So I've got a weapon mounted light with a thumb button for activations for shooting in the dark. I've got a 1:4 low power variable optic. This one's a Steiner. And I've got an offset red dot too that gives me 1x red dot capabilities for if I'm shooting off odd angles of cover, or just need to have that illuminated red dot reticle. This one is running an ADM ambidextrous lower, so I can operate the bolt catch, bolt release, safety, everything that I can do with my primary hand I can do with my support hand as well on both sides of the rifle. This is a Geisley trigger. This is SDE Voltor A5 buffer system. Ford Controls designed small parts, and this is an effective kind of all-arounder setup. It is a short barrel, so like I said, that's going to limit your effective range, but for where I live and the type of environments that I spend the most time in, this is what makes the most sense for me. All this equipment though does come with a weight penalty, so everything from the backup sights to the light to the two optics, the type of stock, the sling, everything comes with a weight penalty. So for such a short rifle, only being 11.5 inches, if you don't count the suppressor, this rifle weighs about 12.5 pounds when it's loaded. So it's not something that you're going to want to be hiking around with for a long time. Like I said, different missions dictate different equipment, and this is a reflection of that.
Yeah, you've got quite a bit of Gucci gear on there, don't you?
A little bit. It's not set up for night vision, but just about everything else: magnification, white light, ambidextrous setup. It's feature laden.
Yeah, certainly. And well, mine is just a big tube with an ignition source on it. So this is a replica of a second model Shortland pattern brown bass musket. It's approximately 74, 75 caliber. Like I mentioned earlier, it shoots a 69 caliber ball, and it just functions like a basic firelock or flintlock, whichever term you want to use. Powder in the pan, close, fire, priming powder ignites the main charge goes off, ball flies on down the barrel. A musket like this is going to be very standard for the militaries at the time, and you're going to have basically everybody using this type of musket, from the armies in Europe to the armies in North America. You're going to have militiamen using this musket. Now, a musket is a smooth bore, larger caliber flintlock and later percussion cap weapon. Muskets in general take far less time to reload than, say, a rifled a rifled gun, and they're also a lot easier to keep clean and maintain since there's no grooves in the bore, and it's easy to stuff cleaning materials down there.
So quick question. You mentioned earlier about everything you carry being multi-purpose. With such a high caliber weapon, could you hunt large game with this?
You absolutely can, yes. And if you're going to hunt larger game, I would use a larger powder charge, but again, I'm going to have to be careful with how high I get that powder charge. Even though I'm not putting super high pressures in here, I'm not seating the ball in there to where it's just stuck, and the only thing that'll send it out is the explosion inside. But we do want to be careful to keep our pressures low enough to be able to not bust the barrel. In reenacting, that's one of the things that causes these type of guns to rupture and blow up, is people putting double charges down. They'll put multiple powder charges on top of each other, or
everybody's looking for Bubba's flaming hot hand load.
Exactly. So you'll have multiple charge stacked on top of each other, and that's what we want to watch out for. To answer your question, yes, this is essentially a 12 gauge shotgun, so you can shoot round ball, you can shoot buckshot, you can shoot bird shot through it. Just about anything. I suppose you can cram rocks down there and shoot it out of there.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. It has a lot of functionality in that way. Mine's much less involved to load and shoot. You just really have to watch out for your 4 basic gun safety principles that everybody learns. Other than that, it's just a matter of inserting the magazine, dropping the bolt, flipping off the safety, and firing. But yours seems to have a lot more, multifunctional capability.
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes when we think about the Revolutionary War, one of the first guns that comes to mind is the rifle. And the rifle is going to be more of a specialist weapon. This is you could think of this as, I hate to use this comparison, but the sniper rifle of the day.
Right.
But this is going to be something that is going to be owned by private civilians. And out here in Kentucky, there's going to be, obviously a lot of the hunters have these guns, and they bring them over the mountains here to Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. And when you think...
So rifled barrel.
Yes.
Providing more accuracy.
Yes.
More range.
Yes, so that is one advantage of this type of weapon. So the effective range of a musket is actually going to be pretty far, but to get accurate hits above 100 to 150 yards, you're really going to want to use a rifle. Yeah, and these are not going to be nearly as common as some, let's just say, pop culture would say. The one misconception about these type of rifles is that they would have been called Kentucky rifles. They were called Kentucky rifles, but that was a 19th century term. Back during the Revolutionary War era, and just before and just after, these were not known as Kentucky rifles. These, as a very broad term, would have been known as Pennsylvania rifles, but more specifically, they would have been known by the county that they were made in. So Bedford style, Lancaster style rifle, and that's the type of proper name that they would have referred to these type of guns as. And this specific type is a Blue Ridge style. And these are going to be used by what we call the over-the-mountain men. And those would have been the men from the region of North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, western Virginia, and eastern Kentucky. So kind of maybe a little bit around from where you're from. Huh?
Yeah. Mountains of East Tennessee.
Yeah. Well, I think that just about wraps it up for today. There's a lot more we could talk about with both kits.
And I think this was a good overview of the the different materials, but kind of the similar principles that underlie both these.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that I think really ties these two eras together is that mentality of we're going to be, the gear and kit and the weapons that we carry needs to be tailored to the situations that we're going to be going into.
Practicality.
Well, we've got a few hours left in the day. What do you want to do now?